The Hall of the Nine Banners held its breath the way halls do when someone is being erased in public, slowly, with the full weight of ceremony behind it. Jasper stood at the center of the stone floor, her hands loose at her sides, her boots worn at the heel, her pack mark invisible beneath the collar of a gray dress that belonged to no house and carried no color. Around her, the 9 carved banners descended from the vaulted ceiling, each one naming a territory whose pack still stood, whose land still answered to a living bloodline. 8 of them meant nothing to her. The 9th, the silver ash tree on a field of dark green, had not been raised in 12 years, and the elder standing 3 steps above her on the dais was the reason for that. Elder Bryn spread his hands over the lectern as though offering the court a gift. "The Ward Jasper," he said, and the title landed like a flat stone dropped on water, rippling outward through the gallery until even the scribes at the far wall looked up. "Sole surviving ward of the Ashvale line, presented today as living evidence that the Ashvale blood claim has no remaining heir capable of standing." Jasper kept her hands still. She had been told to stand quietly. She had been told it by 3 separate council runners in the week before the territorial court convened, each one arriving with the same rehearsed gentleness, each one carrying the same implication, that her presence here was a formality, a final procedural mark in the ledger before the Ashvale land claim was formally dissolved, and the 400 acres of upland forest and river valley that had once been her pack's home were redistributed among the border territories. She had been told that cooperation would be noted. She had not been told what cooperation meant. She was learning now. At the far end of the dais, in the chair that sat apart from the council chairs by 3 deliberate steps and a stone riser that acknowledged no equal, Calder Voss had not yet spoken. He had arrived after the elders, the way kings arrive, not late, but last, and the air in the hall had organized itself differently once he sat down. The gallery had shifted. The scribes had straightened. Even the torches on the north wall seemed to burn at a more careful angle. He was watching Bryn speak. He had not looked at Jasper yet, or not in a way she had caught, which was not the same thing. Bryn continued. "The ward records confirm a single surviving minor, placed in council custody 12 years ago following the Ashvale territory dispute. She holds no pack rank, no bond mark, and no sovereign claim under the Compact's restoration clause. We present her today so the court may witness the bloodline's end in living form and proceed to redistribution without contest." Living evidence, Jasper thought. Not a person presenting a case, not an heir petitioning the court. Evidence. She had known, in the 12 years since the council runners had come for her, that this moment would come eventually. Her pack had been destroyed in a territorial war that the council still called a dispute in its official records, and the word dispute did the work of burying everything that had actually happened. The Ashvale pack had held 400 acres of upland forest and river valley between 2 of the stronger territories, and the 2 stronger territories had wanted those acres, and the council had found procedural reasons to step back from the conflict until there was nothing left to arbitrate. Jasper had been 9 years old. She remembered the smell of burning pine. She had spent 12 years as the council's ward, housed in the Eastern Annex, fed adequately, educated in the Compact's history, and referenced in no official document by name. The ward, Jasper. That was the full extent of what the council had allowed her to be. If she was honest with herself, she had held a small and unreasonable hope that the territorial court would be different. That a gathering of this size, convened by the Alpha King himself to settle old boundary claims across all 9 territories, might include someone who would ask the question that no council runner had ever asked. What did Jasper herself say about the Ashvale claim? Bryn turned from the lectern and looked at her. "The ward has been asked to sign a final accounting," he said. A sworn ink record acknowledging that the Ashvale bloodline has no standing claim to the Eastern Upland Territories, that the ward release is voluntary and complete, and that no future petition will be brought under the Ashvale name. The document was already on the table. Jasper looked at it. She looked at the ink brush. She looked at the parchment, at the careful formal language that had been drafted, probably weeks ago, in the full expectation that she would pick up the brush and make the mark that ended what was left of her pack's name. She heard the gallery breathing. She did not pick up the brush. "I won't sign it," she said. The sound in the hall did not change loudly. There was no gasp, no eruption. What happened was quieter and more total. Every small ambient movement in the room ceased at once. The shuffling feet, the soft turning of ledger pages, the muted exchange of the scribes. The hall became the kind of still that only gathers when something unexpected has been said in a place that was designed to prevent the unexpected. Bryn's expression held for one breath, and then it changed in the specific way that power changes when it encounters resistance it did not account for. Not anger, not yet. Recalibration. "The ward," he said carefully, "has been given an opportunity to cooperate with the court's business in an orderly fashion." "The ward," Jasper said, and she used the word the same way he had, flat and without decoration, "has been given an opportunity to erase her pack's name and call it voluntary. Those are different things." She had not planned those exact words. She had thought, in the long, sleepless week before the court, about what she might say if the moment came, about whether she would have the nerve to say anything at all. What she had not planned was how steady her voice would sound. It surprised her. What she also had not planned was that in the silence following her refusal, she would become aware, with a specificity that had nothing to do with planning, that the Alpha King had turned his head. She did not look directly at him. She could feel the shift the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, a deepening of something in the room's weight, a new point around which the gallery's attention was silently reorganizing. Calder Voss had been still since the proceedings began, the stillness of someone who has learned to let other people exhaust themselves before he moves. What was different now was the quality of the stillness. She kept her eyes on Bryn. She was not ready to look at what was behind that stillness. Bryn turned to the assembled elders. "The court will note that the ward has refused to cooperate with the settlement process." "The court will also note," said a voice from the far end of the dais, calm and unhurried and carrying without effort to every corner of the hall, "that the ward has not been offered counsel, representation, or a formal statement of her own grounds." It was not a reprimand exactly. It was a factual observation. It landed in the room with the weight of a reprimand anyway, because Calder Voss had spoken it, and the distance between a factual observation and a command, when a king makes it, is mostly ceremonial. Bryn's mouth opened and closed. "If you have found this story, stay with it. What happens in this hall before the day is out is the kind of thing that gets written into the compact's history and then argued over for a generation, and it begins with a woman who would not pick up an ink brush." Jasper did look at him then. She had to. Calder Voss met her eyes across the floor of the hall, across the 30 feet of cold stone between them, and what she saw in his face was not what she expected. She expected the blunt assessment of a king reviewing a complication. What she found was harder to categorize. He was watching her with the particular attention of someone who has registered something that doesn't fit his existing architecture of the room, someone who has encountered a variable the model did not include, and is now running the model again. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then he looked away, back to Bryn, and the expression closed. "The ward's grounds are immaterial," Bryn said, recovering his register. "The compact's restoration clause requires a living heir of demonstrable standing. The ward holds no rank, no bond, and no recognized sovereign lineage." "Then demonstrate the absence," Calder said. Present the ward records confirming the terms of her custody. If the bloodline standing is as clear as the council claims, the documentation will settle the question. Bryn's pause was very brief. The ward records are sealed as a matter of council confidentiality. Unseal them. The two words arrived without inflection. They did not need inflection. Bryn straightened, and Jasper watched him make the calculation that every man makes when a wall he built in secret is suddenly being walked toward by someone who does not know it is a wall, or who does know, which is worse. The records would require preparation before they could be presented to the court, Bryn said. The session should proceed. We can revisit the documentation at the council's next quarterly convening. We will revisit it now, Calder said. The session is in recess until the ward records are produced. He stood. The gallery rose with him, the automatic response of a room that has been told its shape by years of protocol, and the session was in recess whether Bryn had finished speaking or not. Jasper stood where she had been standing. No one came to offer her a seat. No one from the council side of the room approached her. The two runners who had escorted her to the hall that morning had retreated to the gallery wall, and they were watching her with the particular expression of people who have realized their instructions did not account for this development and are waiting to receive new ones. Petra found her first. She came from the east corridor, her gray cloak carrying road dust that hadn't been there that morning, which meant she had only just arrived, and her eyes swept the hall in the efficient way they always did, cataloging exits, counting the elders, noting the positions of the King's Guard before they settled on Jasper. You didn't sign? Petra said. She said it quietly, coming close enough to speak without the gallery hearing, but it was not a question. No. Good. Petra looked at the document still lying on the small table, the ink brush dry beside it. I've spoken to 2 representatives from the Northern Holdings. They know the Ashvale boundary stones. They remember the river survey. She paused. They won't speak publicly without cover from somewhere higher up. But they're not on Bryn's side either. Jasper had known Petra since before the destruction. They had grown up running the same forest trails, had learned the boundary markers of the same 400 acres, had stood on the same ridge and looked down at the river valley where the Ashvale Hall had stood. Petra had been 12 when the war came. She had been older enough, and far enough from the hall that night, to survive what Jasper had survived by being 9 and carried out by someone who had not survived the carrying. How did you get into the court? Jasper asked. The Northern Representatives guest list. I've been in the Eastern Territories for the past 3 weeks. I knew this session was coming. Petra glanced toward the dais, where the elders were speaking in clustered low voices. He asked for the ward records, she said. I know. That's not nothing. Jasper looked toward the far end of the dais, where Calder Voss had paused in a low exchange with the man Jasper understood to be his beta, a steady-looking figure named Soren, who had been at the king's shoulder since the session opened and who was now listening with the compressed attention of someone processing several things at once. It's not an endorsement, Jasper said. He asked for documentation. That's procedure. Petra said nothing, which was its own form of argument. Soren moved. He crossed to a door that Jasper had not registered as significant, produced a key from the cord at his belt, and disappeared through it. He was back within 10 minutes, and when he returned, he carried a flat document case of a different color than the standard council cases, a darker leather, with a seal that Jasper did not recognize at that distance. She would learn later what it contained. Soren would tell her himself, in the corridor outside the hall, speaking in the direct and precise way of a man who has decided that the truth will travel faster if he delivers it himself, rather than watching it arrive through other channels. What the case contained was a set of ward records that had never been entered into the council's primary archive. Bryn's faction had deposited them in a secondary holding within the king's territorial records, believing they would rest there undisturbed, and they had rested there undisturbed for 12 years. What they contained, among other things, was a sworn assessment made by the attending compact officer at the time of Jasper's placement, noting that the ward was the recognized bloodline heir of the Ashvale pack, that her claim to sovereign restoration was legally active under the compact's own clause, and that the council had assumed guardianship on the explicit condition that her claim would be held in trust, not extinguished. Bryn's faction had controlled 4 of the 6 council votes. They had controlled the archive. They had not controlled the secondary record that the king's territorial office maintained independently. Jasper did not know any of this when the session was called back to order. She knew only that Soren had returned with something in a case that made 2 of the 5 elders look at the document and then look at Bryn, with the specific stillness of people revising a long-held assumption. She was still standing at the center of the floor. Calder returned to his chair. He did not call the hall to order himself. He sat, and the hall understood that it should be in order, and it was. Bryn opened with the smoothness of a man who has survived 3 decades of council politics by controlling the available information. The ward records confirm the council's custody arrangement, established 12 years ago following the Ashvale dissolution. The ward was placed as a dependent of the council under standard post-conflict provisions. The records confirm more than that, Soren said. He said it from his position at the king's right, not loudly, and the room heard every word. Bryn turned his head toward Soren with the controlled speed of a man who is calculating whether he can contain this. The attending officer's assessment, Soren continued, documents the ward as the recognized bloodline heir of the Ashvale pack, with a live claim under Restoration Clause 7 of the compact. The council's custodial arrangement required that claim to be held in trust. There is no record of a formal trust designation, no appointed guardian of the claim, and no court proceeding that would have legally extinguished it. What there is, and here, he set the page flat on the lectern because his hands understood that putting it down was more powerful than continuing to hold it, is a series of council sessions over the past 12 years at which the Ashvale land claim was treated as extinct in the minutes, while the ward records that would have contradicted that treatment remained sealed. The hall was very quiet. Bryn said, "The secondary records were held in the King's Territorial Archive, pending a determination about their relevance. The council did not have access to those records." "The council deposited them there," Soren said. Bryn's second pause was longer than his first. Calder had not moved. He had not spoken during Soren's presentation. He was watching Bryn with the patient attention of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting for the room to finish drawing the same conclusion. Jasper felt the moment shift. She felt it in the way she had learned to feel things in the 12 years of the Eastern Annex, not loudly, not with the specific drama of a door opening or a voice raised, but as a change in the air's composition, the way a room changes when someone in it has decided that what was previously uncertain is now settled. Calder stood. He did not raise his voice. He walked to the edge of the dais and stood there for a moment without speaking, and the hall understood, from the way he was standing, that what he was about to say would not be procedural. "The Compact's Restoration Clause," he said, "grants this court authority to restore a land claim when 2 conditions are met: a living heir of demonstrable bloodline standing, and evidence that the claim was actively suppressed rather than legally extinguished." He looked at Bryn. "Both conditions have been met today. The ward records document the heir. The discrepancy between the sealed secondary records and the council's public proceedings documents the suppression." Bryn said, "The Alpha King's interpretation of the clause is subject to council review. The compact grants the Alpha King final authority on bloodline land claims when fraud is demonstrated," Calder said. "The council drafted that provision. I would expect its members to be familiar with it." He turned then, not toward Bryn, toward her. Jasper had spent the morning holding herself inside a specific posture, upright, hands loose, eyes clear, the particular discipline of someone who has learned that the only thing the hierarchy cannot take, if she does not give it, is her own carriage. She held it now, even as the hall turned with him, even as she understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once like cold water, that something she had stopped letting herself want was about to happen. Calder descended the dais steps. He walked across the stone floor toward her, and the hall held the specific silence of a room watching history shift. The 9 banners above them did not move. The torches did not change. The elders did not speak. He stopped 3 feet from her. "Jasper Duskwalker," he said, and the full name landed in the hall the way full names only land when they carry the weight of formal recognition, not as a procedural designation, but as an acknowledgement. Heir of the Ashvale Pack. By the authority of the compact and the record before this court, I find the Ashvale land claim to be live, legitimate, and suppressed by the council without legal process. He paused. The hall had been silent before. What it became now was something below silence, the held breath of many people who understand they are witnessing something that cannot be undone. The 400 acres of upland forest and river valley held in the Ashvale boundary are restored to the Ashvale bloodline, he said. Effective from this session, entered into the court record, witnessed by all present. The redistribution order is void. The document on the table is void. Jasper did not look at the document. She looked at him. She had told herself, when she stepped into this hall that morning, that she was coming to lose something cleanly, to face the final erasure with her eyes open rather than pretending it was not happening. She had not told herself what she would do if the loss did not come. She had not made space for this. The hope was too specific and too dangerous to have maintained for 12 years, and she had closed it off carefully, and now it was opening anyway, and her eyes were burning in a way she had not expected, and would not, for anything, permit to spill over in front of the gallery. She said, "It's recorded in this court's record?" "It is." "And Elder Bryn's faction cannot bring a procedural challenge to reverse it?" She heard a quiet breath from the gallery. She understood she was not supposed to ask follow-up questions. She had not been well enough trained in the customs of people who receive things gracefully to stop. Calder's expression changed. It was the smallest possible change, a shift in the set of his mouth that another person might have missed. What she read in it, to her considerable confusion, was something close to recognition. The compact's final authority provision is not subject to procedural challenge from the council, he said. The record stands. Bryn stood at the lectern with the particular rigidity of someone who has reached the limit of his available moves. 2 of his 4 elders were no longer meeting his eyes. The gallery behind them was watching with the calibrated attention of people who are deciding, very rapidly, where they will position themselves when the session closes and the corridors fill with conversation. Bryn was not broken. He was diminished. In the way of halls and courts and old hierarchies, the difference between those 2 things is visible in the room long before it is acknowledged aloud. Sorin, at the edge of the dais, allowed himself one small thing that was not official. He looked at his king, and then he looked at Jasper, and his expression carried the briefly visible satisfaction of a man who has been tracking a thing for longer than the room knows. Petra stood at the edge of the gallery, her hands still, her road dust still on her cloak, her face doing the thing it always did when something she had waited for finally arrived. Not surprise, but the release of a long-held tension, quiet and complete. The session was formally closed by the compact's recorder, who read the restoration decree into the official record with the careful pronunciation of someone who understands the weight of what he is reading. The redistribution order for the Ashvale territory was voided. The document on the small table was removed without ceremony. The ward records from the secondary archive were entered into the primary record under Jasper's full name, as they should have been entered 12 years ago. Bryn left the hall before most of the gallery. He moved with the controlled speed of someone who is not quite fleeing but is also not lingering, and 3 of his 4 elders followed him at a distance that communicated precisely that they were not with him. The northern representative's 2 witnesses, the ones Petra had mentioned, found Jasper before she reached the corridor. They were older men, weathered in the way of people who have spent their lives near mountain forests, and they shook her hand with a directness that owed nothing to the ceremony of the last several hours. "We knew those boundary stones," one of them said. "We've known them for 20 years. They were never contested. Not honestly." "Then I'd like your testimony in the formal record," Jasper said. "When you have time." "We'll make time," the second man said, and nodded, and moved off. She stood in the emptying hall and let it be real for a moment. 400 acres, 12 years, the Ashvale name in a live court record with her name beside it. Petra came up behind her and said nothing. She stood close enough that their shoulders touched, and that was enough. In the corridor outside, Jasper was moving toward the east passage when Soren stepped into her path. Not blocking, offering. "The king will ride north tomorrow," he said. "The Ashvale territory is northeast of the old Greyvale border. He intends to observe the boundary verification personally." He paused, and his voice carried the careful neutrality of a man delivering information whose implications he is declining to name. "You will be given escort from the court's gate at dawn, horses and provisions for 4 days." Jasper looked at him. "Is that an invitation or an order?" Soren considered this with the brief focus of a man who is precise about the difference. "An invitation," he said, "from the king. Personally." She thought about this in the hours between the session's close and the morning, lying on the narrow cot in the eastern annex where she had slept for 12 years, looking at the ceiling she had memorized to a degree that would have embarrassed her if she had let herself think about it. An invitation from the king. Personally. She told herself it was practical. The boundary verification required someone who knew the land. She was the only one who had walked those 400 acres as a child, who knew where the river bent south, where the oldest boundary stone sat half-buried in river silt, where the upland tree line thickened into the old-growth section her father had considered a sacred marker of the pack's history. She told herself it was not what the small, treacherous part of her wanted it to be. Dawn came gray and cold and precise, the way dawn comes in the northern territories when the seasons have turned and the air has that particular dry clarity that belongs to high ground before the first snow. The court gate was already open. 2 horses were saddled and a third was loaded with provisions. Soren was there, and 2 of the king's guard and Petra, who had apparently been invited by someone, or had invited herself, and whose presence was the most stabilizing thing in the courtyard. Calder arrived last, as he had arrived to the session. He came through the inner door in riding clothes that carried no ceremony, and he was already watching the gate when Jasper looked at him, which meant he had noted where she was standing before he reached the courtyard, and she filed that away without examining it too closely. They rode north. The land changed as they left the court city behind, the stone and managed order of the court district giving way to the rolling terrain of the eastern territories, and then to the long upland grade that Jasper had not crossed since she was 9 years old and being carried in the opposite direction. She recognized things she had not expected to recognize, the shape of a ridge against the sky, the specific gray of the stone outcroppings on the high eastern shoulder, the way the tree line bent as you approached the Ashvale boundary. Calder rode beside her for most of the second day. They did not speak at length, not in the way the court's proceedings had been speech. They spoke in the practical register of people covering ground, this valley, that ridge, the question of whether the river had shifted since the old survey. She answered his questions about the land without thinking about the fact that she knew the answers. The knowledge was there, 12 years sealed inside her, waiting to be useful. On the second evening, when the light had gone orange over the western ridge and the camp was being made near a stand of birch at the upland boundary, he came to stand beside her at the tree line. She was looking at the old boundary stone, the one she had recognized from 30 feet away, before she consciously understood what she was seeing: a waist-high granite post with the Ashvale ash tree cut into its eastern face. "You knew it," he said. "I helped my father walk this line when I was 7, she said. "He told me the name of every stone." A pause. The birches moved in the evening air. "My father," Calder said, and his voice changed on the word in a way that was not planned, "held authority he did not choose how to spend until it was too late to choose differently." He stopped. It was a brief and unguarded sentence, and she felt him register that he had said it, and the conversation moved forward without either of them naming what he had offered. She thought about it later, in the quieter hours. She thought about a king who called a territorial court to settle old boundary claims and then asked for the ward records when the elder would have preferred he didn't, who called a recess when Bryn needed the session to keep moving, who stood at the edge of the dais and walked across 30 feet of stone floor and spoke her full name in front of every witness in the hall. She thought about what it meant to hold final authority over an outcome and choose how to spend it. She thought about the way he had looked at her after she refused the ink brush, the model running again, the variable it had not included. She was not, she told herself firmly, reading something into it that was not there. He had done what the compact required of a king who discovered fraud. It was authority spent correctly, which was rare enough to be worth noting, but it was not personal. Then she thought about the word he had used: personally. On the third morning they crossed the Ashvale boundary. Jasper stopped her horse at the first stone post and did not immediately move past it. She sat and looked at the tree line, at the upland grass still golden in the late season, at the way the forest opened 200 yards ahead into the river valley she had not seen in 12 years. The morning was very clear, cold and precise and unhurried. Petra brought her horse up alongside. She did not say anything. She understood, with the knowledge of someone who had been waiting for this crossing as long as Jasper had, that it did not need words. Calder held back. Jasper was aware of him, 2 horse lengths behind her, not pressing, not filling the silence with instruction or ceremony, waiting for her to choose when to cross. She crossed. The land was familiar in the way of something recovered from a very long time ago, not the sharp recognition of a place unchanged, but the layered recognition of a place that has continued its own life in your absence and is now allowing you to re-enter it. The river was where she remembered. The old-growth section of the upland was thicker than it had been, 12 years of undisturbed growth, the ash trees broader, the undergrowth dense and healthy. The hall's foundation stones were visible under moss and vine where the building had been burned, and she made herself look at them without flinching, because that was also part of the land. She dismounted near the foundation. The granite was cold under her hand. The carved lintel stone that had marked the hall's main entrance was still in place, half buried, the Ashvale ash tree cut into it by a hand she recognized, without being able to articulate how she recognized it. Her father's mark. He had cut it himself. He had told her when she was small, because the person who makes a mark wants to know the hand that made it endures. She heard steps behind her. Not Petra's steps. Petra knew when to stay back. Calder stopped beside her. He looked at the lintel stone for a moment, and then he looked at her, and his face was doing the thing it had done in the corridor outside the hall when he said the word personally, the careful opening of something he would usually keep closed. This land needed someone to come home to it, he said. She kept her hand on the stone. It needed someone to fight for it first. It had that, he said. Today. She looked at him then, the way she had not let herself look at him in the hall, without the discipline of distance, without the management of what she was allowed to want. She had been fighting for 12 years for the right to stand on this ground. He had made that standing irrevocable. Those two facts were both true, and they sat beside each other without resolving into something simpler, and she was old enough, and had been through enough, to let them be both true at once. He said, "I would like to come back here, when the boundary survey is complete, and the record is settled." A pause, shorter than his pauses in the hall. "If that is welcome." Jasper thought of the Hall of the 9 Banners, and the hall waiting for her to be erased, and the hall watching her refuse, and the hall going quiet. She thought of 30 feet of stone floor crossed by a king who did not have to cross it. "It is welcome," she said. The boundary survey took 2 more days, careful and unhurried, with the king's recorder setting down each stone's position and condition in the compact's formal language, and Jasper walking the full 400 acres, naming what she knew, letting the land name itself back to her through her feet and her hands, and the specific quality of the upland air. Petra walked beside her for the river section, and they did not talk much, because they were people who had learned to let the present moment be enough when the present moment was sufficient. On the last afternoon, the recorder read the completed survey back in the formal compact language while everyone present stood at the site of the old hall. When it was done, Petra looked at Jasper for a long moment. "Your father named you for the gray stone on the upland ridge," she said, "the one that turns the color of ash in morning light." Jasper had not known Petra knew that. She had not known anyone outside her pack knew that. She felt the words settle into her somewhere below the place words usually settle. "He named the pack the same way," Jasper said, "for the ash tree that doesn't burn through. It bends, and the root holds." Bryn's formal censure was recorded by the Compact Council in the weeks following the court session. 2 of his 4 elders signed the censure alongside the other council members, the speed of their signing communicating, precisely, the arithmetic of allegiance when a structure shifts. Bryn retained his council seat but lost the chairmanship of the Eastern Territorial Committee, which was the instrument he had used to manage the ward records for 12 years, and its loss was complete and irreversible. He did not speak publicly about the Ashvale restoration. He understood that the specific manner in which he had been humbled, with his own sealed records on a lectern and his own compact provision cited against him in front of a full territorial court, was the kind of exposure that does not improve by being discussed. The Ashvale territory was entered into the compact's living record under Jasper's name. The ward designation was formally closed. The Eastern Annex room was released. Someone cleared it the following week, and Jasper was not present when they did, because she was already in the north. She did not go back to the annex. The hall, when it was rebuilt, would take time that she was prepared to give it. There were craftspeople to find, materials to source from the northern timber holdings, decisions to be made about whether to rebuild on the old foundation or beside it. All of that would come. The coming was not the point. What she did first, before the planning and the sourcing and the deliberate construction of the future, was walk the full boundary one more time alone. She started at the south post, where the compact road met the Ashvale line, and she walked the perimeter in the order her father had taught her, south to east, to north to west, and back to south, naming each stone in the way he had named them to her, each one placed by her people with the understanding that the land does not belong to the one who holds the deed, but to the one who walks it, and knows it and returns to it. She was on the western boundary, where the upland grass met the first of the old-growth ash trees, when she heard a horse on the road behind her. She knew the step. She did not turn immediately. She finished the last stone's name in her own mind, giving it the completeness it was owed, and then she turned. Calder had dismounted at the south post and walked the rest. He stood at the edge of the old-growth section and did not say anything, because nothing needed saying. He had come because he said he would come, and here was the simplest kind of evidence. He was here. She looked at him across the space of the western boundary, with the ash trees at her back and the 400 acres of her pack's land around her, and she was, for the first time in 12 years, standing exactly where she was supposed to be. The route held.